What is going on, my broskiis? My name is Toadski, back again, here to bring you guys yet another One Piece Treasure Cruise video, and we're here with a showcase with the most recent super evolution on One Piece Treasure Cruise being Luffy and Law. This was, a really highly anticipated character to get a 6+ on the initial release of Luffy and Law. Like, this was one of the most hype releases in Treasure Cruise history. A lot of people on Global were so excited for this, of course, being such a high Rainbow Orb booster, the ability to bypass defensive effects, which we're going to showcase a lot in this video, and then having that really nice Rainbow ability, essentially, boosting all characters with the Captain effect. Of course, in today's day and age, when you really look at his kit, there's really not a lot to love. I mean, like, Luffy and Law, they don't really do a ton, but what I will say is that the main use case I found for Luffy and Law to actually have some pretty solid usage is by abusing their switch effect, which makes their own normal attacks bypass defensive effects, and then essentially stacking everything, putting all your eggs into one basket with Luffy and Law, and then, obviously just doing as much damage as you can with them, ignoring Rainbow Shield, barriers, nullification, damage threshold. I think that's going to be the best use case for this character moving forward, and honestly, I actually had a pretty good time using this character. But of course, it's the issue of the fact that it is a Luffy and a Law character. We have a lot of good Luffys in the game. We've got a lot of good Laws in the game. So there's not going to be that many opportunities to actually use this character in content, which is unfortunate. But what I will say is that this character was actually pretty fun to use, all things considered. So let's actually break down exactly what's going on here. So of course, with Luffy and Law, they do have slightly different captain effects. And the way that it kind of works, like one of the major components of their 6+ and their level limit break, is that in the captain ability, it states that anytime you inflict weakness with a special, it allows that effect to bypass enemies' immunity. So while that is pretty good on paper, the effectiveness of being able to apply weakness with a special, especially when you have a look at like how they apply weakness with their own kit, it's just not something you're going to see that often. So we'll get to that as we go along, but in terms of everything else, I mean, they provide up to a 4.75 times attack boost. With Law's captain ability, Luffy can provide a 4.5 times boost, and then of course in their dual form, they can get up to a 5.25 times attack boost. They have sign-in slots beneficial. They also heal for every perfect that you hit. It also says that in their dual form, if you tap on them with a dex or a quick slot, it will actually apply increased damage taken to all enemies. It doesn't go through full immunity, but that's still a really neat effect that they have in their captain ability. But there isn't honestly much of a reason to use them as a captain, in my personal opinion. So we'll get into their special. So their special is interesting in the fact that it's one of these dual units that has a slightly different special based on which part of the dual unit is activating the special. So in Luffy's case, when you activate his special, the difference is that he does a 400 times attack to a single target, and then it also says that if you have paralysis on your crew, he will go ahead and inflict weakness to the enemy, which of course, as a captain, that goes through immunity, and then he will go ahead and remove 7 turns of paralysis. Now, Law, slightly differently, will do 100 times his attack, it goes through defensive effects, and it targets all enemies. So while Luffy is single target, Law does AoE, and his effect says that if you have bind status on any of your characters, he can remove it and also inflict weakness. But obviously the main issue is that, bind, typically, when you encounter bind, you could get yourself in the situation where Law is inflicted with the bind and then like you can't use his special to remove it. You can find some really interesting situations where it's not going to work as well. And then obviously you just would have seen in this clip here where we could have done it with Law on that stage. However, the fact is he's despaired, which means that the weakness effect of going through immunity wouldn't actually work. So yeah, there's just really weird scenarios where I just don't think it's going to be really that applicable. And then they also do make strength, dex, and quick slots have matching slot effects. They also buff your attack boost by 0.5, which can go very well with this character's switch effects, which we'll get to very, very shortly. And then they also provide that 3 times orb boost, of course. They both will do that, 3 times orb boost to all characters for 1 turn. Now, in my personal opinion, I would have loved if the orb boost that they provided was either a higher multiplier or keep it to 3 times, but make it for at least 2 turns to get around enemy intimidate, or if the enemy has a revive or something like that. a long time ago when they were doing a lot of these buffs that were only lasting for 2 turns, I really wasn't that big of a fan of that kind of thing. However, I felt like there has been a lot of bosses that have had that capability of like reviving, or bosses that you have to kill over 2 turns. And I've definitely found that, you know, buffs that only last for 2 turns are actually still pretty valuable. You know, obviously having a 3-turn buff can be kind of nice, but sometimes you don't need a 3-turn buff, or sometimes a 3-turn buff can actually be a detriment. So I found like a 2-turn buff is actually kind of nice. So it would have been nice if they had that. Unfortunately, they do not. So let's get to the most interesting component of this character's kit, is their switch effect. So the base switch will always remove their own slot bind. It gives them a guaranteed matching slot through block, gives them a 2x attack boost for 1 turn, and allows this character's normal attacks to bypass enemies' defensive effects for 1 turn. And then if you get to 7 switches, that effect will be a full orb change. So everyone's slots, including block, changed into matching. All characters get a 2.25 times attack boost, and then make their own normal attacks bypass defensive effects. So this is the most interesting component, because being able to just use that switch effect essentially every turn to ignore defensive effects, whilst also giving themselves a guaranteed matching slot and giving themselves a 2x attack boost, with how powerful modern captain effects are these days, you, in a lot of cases, like against like a mini boss that's just kind of in your way, using their switch effect to just bypass whatever it may be, barrier, nullification, threshold, rainbow shield, just you don't even have to remove it. So their switch effect, giving them a matching slot, giving them a 2x attack boost, like more than enough, that's going to be enough to kill, which is kind of wild. And then of course in their super switch effect, giving everyone an attack boost, everyone an orb boost, not orb boost, sorry, but everyone matching slots, and then still having that capability to bypass defensive effects is just really, really nice. So that's where I think the most applicable use case is for Luffy and Law, is the fact that they can just bypass defensive effects. You just can ignore a lot of things, like in this piece of content here, ignoring the barrier. We just do not have to worry about it at all. And then against Queen on the final stage, he has a lot of defensive effects. Typically this is the content you would want to use the Sulongs, but we can just kind of ignore it anyway. And of course, Luffy and Law get access to a wide variety of supports, which definitely help their usability moving forward. So overall, while it is not the most impressive super evolution that we've had in Treasure Cruise history, I think that this is a character that may see some play because of the wide variety of supports. Being able to bypass defensive effects is always going to be broken. So that's my overall opinion on Luffy and Law 6+. I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions on it down below in the comment section. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to go ahead and leave a like. And if you want to stay up to date with all the content I post, including more One Piece Treasure Cruise content, make sure to hit the subscribe button down below. And that, guys, I'll see you guys within the next video.